All right, hello everyone. Today we wanted to talk about hopefully a fun, interesting topic, which is what we're calling best books you haven't read. So there's an assumption here, obviously, that you haven't read these books, but we tried to find some of our favorite. Excuse me. We tried to find some of our favorite, just wonderful, incredible books that really don't have large. What's the word? A large following, large kind of fan base, right? We know all of the ones that just have kind of integrated with pop culture, but these that are nonetheless wonderful books, but haven't integrated into pop culture. So maybe we can just kind of go back and forth for a second.
Sure.
So do you want to share one of your first books?
So probably my very first book that the same author that writes the book, the King Arthur book, Once and Future King.
T.H. White.
T.H. White wrote a little teeny book called Mistress Masham's Repose. And it's essentially a little story about a girl who discovers the Lilliputans that Gulliver brings back, that is talked about in the novel, and he tucks them in his pocket or something. Well, she inherits a house where these Lilliputans have been living, and it is charming and delightful and smart and funny, and it's a children's book, but at the same time it's one of those books I was just charmed by, and I would recommend it to anyone ever. It's called Mistress Masham's Repose, and the theme of the book is, if you found a little 1-inch baby that was alive and you wanted to keep it as a pet, should you? It's just so, I love books with deep themes, even if they don't seem to have deep themes, but I love deep thinking, and that was a little children's book that actually had some pretty deep thoughts in it.
Very cool. I'll have to check that out because Once and Future King is one of the best books I've ever read in my life.
I love it.
Absolutely incredible book. So my first one is a fiction book. It's called Freddie's Book by John Gardner. We've mentioned John Gardner before in some of these conversations. Absolutely bizarre book. Just absolutely bizarre. But very few books have stuck with me in the way that book has. It's commentary on good and evil and where all of that springs from. Fascinating. And probably not widely read.
Nope.
Really, really fascinating book. So.
Okay, so the next one that I have is, I actually went online and I searched for this, and I typed into the cover because I couldn't remember the name of it. I read this as probably a middle schooler, and I just typed in alien with green skin on cover of book, and below and behold, miracle of the internet, other people were looking for this book too because they remembered it as kids and loved this book. This is probably my first science fiction book. It's called Stranger from the Depths by Gary Turner. And it is, and I don't know what it was about this book, but it was just earthquake, and the earth is open, and they find some things, and there are clues, and it leads them to the center of the earth, and there are these aliens living there. And I'm telling you, this book got me hooked on science fiction. And absolutely, there's a handful of us out there looking for the alien on the green cover book, and darned if we didn't find it. So there's one.
That sounds great. That's actually another one I probably wouldn't mind picking up. So my next one is a nonfiction. This was recommended by one of my most admired statesmen, Ezra Taft Benson. He recommended a book called The American Tradition. There's a lot of debate about what the founders really meant, right, and what the Constitution really means. And it's a short book. It's really not that dense, but its clarity, its commentary on the tradition of the founders, I was really moved by. I thought it was an excellent exposition on all of those things. So recommend that one.
Absolutely. So my next book is play. It's Christopher Marlowe, who is a contemporary of Shakespeare, of course, and it's Dr. Faustus. Now, I'm sure people are pretty familiar with it. I'm hoping. The man who sells his soul to the devil. And I will tell you a little secret about this book. I taught this in homeschool to my children, to my high schoolers, and my probably just about junior junior high schooler, and he didn't realize that it was over his head and it was too hard for him, and turned out to be one of his favorite stories in school. And I would recommend to anyone that you don't put any kind of limitations on kids and where you think their reading level is, because what is that? It's a fabulous story. It's well written, and it was so intriguing that even my elementary school kid could get into it, and it was probably his favorite story. So,
very cool. My next one, going back to fiction, you might have heard the name of Leon Uris before. He was very, at least for a time, very famous historical novelist. Exodus is probably his most famous work.
Absolutely.
But he wrote many historical novels, and I've read every single one of his books. And one of them that really sticks out to me is called Armageddon, and it's about the end of World War II, the siege of Berlin, and then also the Berlin airlift, which is the very first time I heard about the Berlin airlift. And to this day, it is the only fiction book that made me cry.
There you go.
When I read about for the first time the Candy Bombers. And the Berlin airlift, a truly moving book.
And so it's a little sad that we have to that we don't hear about the really great stories of America, and the Candy Bombers is definitely one of them. In that same genre, this is one of the books that I had my family read in our little family book club. When we had one, books by Dr. Tom Dooley, and he wrote 3 books that I can't read the title on that one, it's so old. Deliver Us from Evil, The Edge of Tomorrow, and The Night They Burned the Mountain. And Dr. Tom Dooley was a lieutenant in the Navy who actually was there on the ground before the Vietnam War really got started. He saw what really happened to the people, and I went through a phase where I really enjoyed biographies and autobiographies and real life stories about real life people who were really having to do it. And this is one that these 3 books I cannot recommend highly enough. Tom Dooley was a humanitarian. He loved the people that he served, and he absolutely saw what communism was, what it did to people, and how it made them need to be free, and how they became free, and what the price that they paid for their freedom. And if you need if you're doing any kind of research or background on the subject of the Vietnam War or communism or any of that kind of thing, I would recommend those 3 books to you. Absolutely. Dr. Tom Dooley, and it's Deliver Us from Evil, The Edge of Tomorrow, The Night They Burned the Mountain. Absolutely amazing. And they're just totally forgotten books.
Yep. Those are very good. I have read those, of the ones you've mentioned so far. I'm going to go back to nonfiction for myself. There is a book by a guy named Adam Smith, which you might have heard of before, Wealth of Nations, father of modern economics. But there was a book he wrote before The Wealth of Nations, which was written in 1776, which is awfully interesting, called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which you might say, that sounds dry. And it is, a little bit. But it is absolutely fantastic. It continues to influence my thinking and my perspective on things. He was making insights and observations that we are just now confirming with social study, psychology, all that sort of stuff. Adam Smith figured this stuff out way back in 1759. I mean, when you read this book, it's absolutely incredible to me that this man was making these types of observations hundreds of years ago, and we think we've figured all of this stuff out, right?
Right.
We think
and it's so new.
And it's so new.
What? We've never thought this before.
Adam Smith was writing about this stuff hundreds of years ago. Absolutely incredible book. Another fiction, and some of you science fiction readers may have read this, but many of you probably have not, especially if you're not as into science fiction. But A Canticle for Leibowitz, which she did not like. She couldn't get into. I thought it was incredible. Walter M. Miller. Unbelievable book. I loved it so much. And then my last one, back to nonfiction, is called Fatherless America. And it is, after reading the book, admittedly, I feel like it probably confirmed some of my previous biases, but after reading the book, I became more convinced and more persuaded than ever of so many of the social issues and ills that we see in today are driven back to the breakdown of the family, and most specifically during our modern time, the breakdown of the role of father. And I cannot recommend Fatherless America enough to gain an appreciation of that fact and of the consequences that have followed. So those are some of the best books we feel like we have read that you probably haven't read.
You probably have never read.
You may have. If you have, we'd love to hear if you have and what your thoughts are. But aside from that, happy reading. We hope you enjoy some of our recommendations and let us know what you think.
Thanks.